see my presentation?
Yeah, we can see it.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Alan, and today I'm going to be delivering a speech about the theory and practice of democracy, and I'm going to be explaining why we should teach students about privilege. My presentation is divided in three broad sections. The first one, I give a brief historical account on democracy. I speak about the neoliberal democracy and the social justice democracy model. Then I connect it to the institution of schooling and its formal and hidden curricula. I examine two policy documents from Brazil and Ontario, Canada, and I exemplify how schools have perpetuated liberal discourses via formal and hidden curricula. In my third section, I argue that in order to counterbalance these liberal tenets, we ought to teach children about privilege. In a brief historical account on democracy, I speak about two broad conceptualizations of democracy: the ancient conceptualization, which is the classical participatory view, which took place in Greece and Rome in 500 BC, and the modern conceptualization, which began to develop in Western Europe in the 18th and 19th century. Well, what exactly happened at that time that made us have this new modern conceptualization of democracy? In the 18th century, people in Western Europe lived in a feudal society. That society was extremely hierarchical. So people who lived in the top of the social pyramid, like the king, they enjoyed a lot of privilege compared to people who lived in the bottom of that pyramid. They had unearned advantages. People in the bottom of the pyramid didn't enjoy social mobility. They couldn't become kings. They didn't have freedoms. They didn't enjoy freedoms or had rights. With the rise of liberal ideals and the constitutional movement of the 19th century, people began to live under the rule of the law with liberal democracy, a system of rights that established a fictitious social contract. In that social contract, people would theoretically have different expectations on the state and on individuals. The state would become an arbitrator of rights, and the state would not intervene in the private sphere. And then people would then be able to seek their private interest and maximize their welfare and attain happiness. Individuals were considered agentic, rational beings who could move from point A to point B and achieve their life plan. Of course, in theory, we live in a liberal democracy. People live in a constitutional democratic system of rights, but in practice, we do know that people also face structural arrangements depending where they are located in their social location. They might experience privilege and oppression such as racism, sexism, ableism, because after all, liberalism doesn't call for social justice. There's a gap between theory and practice. People who live in the slums of Brazil do not enjoy the same rights as someone who lives in the top 1% bracket in the country. So there are feminist critiques, socialist critiques to liberal democracy. And those critiques have worsened over time because of neoliberalism. Many people say that now we live in a neoliberal account of democracy, where the power has been shifted back to company and markets that have just tried to maximize their profit, sometimes in detriment of people's well-being. There are many people who have fought to expand the neoliberal model to a social justice one. People such as Paulo Freire in Brazil, Donald Dickey in Canada, and the suffrage movement back in the United States. They saw the state as guarantor and protectors of rights. They tried to democratize the liberal system so that more people could be included in, quote unquote, the democratic system. The question then becomes, how can schools help us expand the neoliberal model of democracy? The institution of school has been also established under liberal democracies. And as such, they also perpetuate liberal tenets through formal and hidden curriculum. Formal curriculum is the bundle of knowledge, skills, and values that students must learn at a specific grades for specific purposes. And the hidden curriculum are the spoken norms and expectations set for students and teachers. But how exactly does the formal curriculum perpetuate liberal tenets? So if we conduct discourse analysis in policy documents, we see that they usually perpetuate agency and mobility. Again, they position students as agentic beings who can exert their agency to achieve their life plan, to become individuals, successful individuals. There's also an emphasis on skills over knowledge. People need to develop skills in order to apply their knowledge to become competent citizens in the polity. So agency, mobility, and skills are ways through which liberalism has permeated social policy. Hidden curriculum. The hidden curriculum, according to many theorists and educational practitioners, is also a way through which liberalism permeates the social fabric of schooling. So in a fifth discipline, Schools That Learn, Sage argued that schools resemble factories. Students are not there to become good citizens. They are there to become good workers. They learn how to follow the rules, to follow instructions. The schools replicate the daily routine of the factory worker. So in 2017, Lurch et al. Published this very interesting article titled The Rise of Individual Agency and Conceptions of Society. They analyzed over 400 secondary schools science textbooks from over 17 countries, and they found out that these textbooks overemphasize people, especially ones empowered with rights. There's an emphasis on agency. Again, people are free, they have freedom, they are rational, and they can achieve their life plan. So the discourse is as if there's no social structure, there's nothing preventing people from achieving their dreams. And that is problematic. Based on this research, I decided to conduct discourse analysis on two policy documents from Brazil and Canada. I did a qualitative research analysis on the Common Core from Brazil, which is a document published by the Ministry of Education in 2018, which has 500 pages, and it delineates the learning rights and contents that students must learn from kindergarten to secondary school. And I also did the same with the Social Science and Humanities curriculum of Ontario, Canada. The document was published in 2013, and this document has over 400 pages. So the question is, how do these policies, these documents position students in relation to social structures? And very interesting, when I analyzed, I did a word count on the word privilege, and the word appeared 3 times, whereas the word agency appeared 44 times. And interestingly, the agency is considered a cross-curriculum objective, meaning that students are expected to exercise agency in all subjects from kindergarten to secondary education. The word appeared in the subjects of Portuguese and religion, but one interesting finding is that it doesn't really address the power dynamics and power relations. And it really asks teachers to teach students about power symmetries using similarities and differences. So it sort of hides the power structures that may prevent people from achieving their life plan in a liberal democracy, which is a very interesting finding. If I compare that to the Social Science and Humanities curriculum of Ontario, Canada, they actually insert the word privilege 18 times in overall expectations, teaching prompts, and its glossary, and the word agency appears 0 times. So compared to Brazil, I argue that they're faring better. And as you can see here, there's a specific expectation that students explain how power and privilege operate in various Canadian socioeconomic and political contexts. And teachers are also expected to develop prompts to speak about the roles of race, gender, sexual orientation, ability, and class, and how privilege, the role that privilege play, as well as power. So there's a huge difference between these two documents, but both of them still somehow focus on this concept of agency. So the question then becomes, what are the consequences of emphasizing agency in education policies and curriculum without teaching about privilege? When this happens, what kind of subliminal messages are schools perpetuating as part of their hidden curriculum? I argue in this paper that when students learn about agency without learning about privilege, they develop a narrow-minded meritocratic worldview. They can start to believe that people, regardless where they come from, are able to achieve their dreams, which is basically the American dream, without really thinking critically about social structures, without realizing that in liberal democracies, social mobility is a broken elevator, and that people may indeed enjoy unearned advantages over others. And that is problematic, I argue, because first of all, this can create resentment among groups, their position in the periphery, and create divisions of extreme polarization, put in jeopardy the very social cohesion that schools aim to create. Secondly, this can also lead people who enjoy a lot of privilege to support a minimalistic role of the state. They may, for example, support laissez-faire policy, and people in the periphery, they may experience even greater levels of inequality and social injustices. I argue that some people may also perceive themselves as failures. If people are agentic beings, if they're rational, they can do whatever they want in a liberal democracy. And if they quote unquote fail, then they may start perceiving themselves as failures. And as a result, there must be a tendency towards self-blame, personal community shame. That's the main argument of this paper. So how can we counterbalance the liberal tenets? I argue that we have to really address have this difficult conversation with the youth. We have to teach children about privilege. But how? How can we do that? Well, I argue that we have to integrate the concept of privilege across disciplines through curriculum flexibilization. We should not only speak about privilege in social sciences, but also in chemistry classes, physics, and so on, via interdisciplinary education, so that everyone can start to think critically about oppression and systems of privilege in neoliberal democracies. And we also have to employ critical theory and intersectional pedagogies, meaning that we have to speak about ourselves and question our social locations. If we analyze policy documents related to curriculum, again, we see a lot of emphasis on skills and not a lot of emphasis on critical thinking related to the individual, related to the privilege that one enjoys only on agency. And again, I argue that that is extremely problematic if we are to construct a social justice account of democracy. So this is my presentation for now, and I would be happy to share that with you later on in my email if anyone has questions.
Thank you, Alan. It's a nice presentation. Thank you. Okay, our next presenters are Assam and Bubakar.